Well, let's join Peter O'Sullivan.
Yes, the 10 runners all in for the King Edward VII Stakes. They're under starters' orders. And they're away, and Starway dwells a little bit in the box. And it's Vaguely Tender, the first to show, from Light Cavalry going up on the outside. Light Cavalry going right up to join Vaguely Tender. Then comes Shining Tour and Rontino on the inside, and then St. Jonathan and Super Asset. Then Northern King and Saviour. And then Starway has made up that lost ground and just relegated Johnny O'Day to last place, and it's Vaguely Tender from Light Cavalry, Rontino, Shining Tour on the inside, Northern King, and then St. Jonathan and Super Asset and Saviour and Starway, and finally Johnny O'Day as they race down into Swindley Bottom. Vaguely Tender and Pat Eddery in the lead. From Joe Mercer on Light Cavalry, then comes Willie Carson on Rontino. Behind them are Shining Tour. Behind Shining Tour is Northern King, and then St. Jonathan and Super Asset, then Saviour, Starway, and Johnny O'Day, and they're past the mile marker already, and Vaguely Tender in the lead from Light Cavalry second and Rontino third. Shining Tour 4-5 is Northern King. 6 just behind them comes St. Jonathan, then Super Asset and Saviour and Starway, and finally Johnny O'Day, and they race past the 7 furlong mark. Vaguely Tender in the lead from Light Cavalry second, Rontino third. Behind them comes Shining Tour. Matching strides then St. Jonathan and Northern King. Saviour making a little bit of ground on the outside of Super Asset, then comes Starway, and finally Johnny O'Day. They're passing the 6 furlong marker, and still Vaguely Tender in the lead. Vaguely Tender from Light Cavalry and Rontino, then close Shining Tour. Saviour making ground on the outside of St. Jonathan, Northern King on the inner, and then Super Asset, then Johnny O'Day, and then Starway, who's been relegated to last. They're coming to the half-mile point from home in the King Edward VII Stakes, and as they do so, it's Vaguely Tender being pressed by Light Cavalry. Then comes Rontino on the inside of Shining Tour, then St. Jonathan, then Saviour making ground on the outside of Northern King. As they turn into the straight, Vaguely Tender from Light Cavalry, Rontino and Shining Tour. Then behind them comes St. Jonathan. Saviour's making ground. Lester Bigger just in behind him. They've got 2.5 furlongs to run. Vaguely Tender being pressed still by Light Cavalry, then Rontino, then Shining Tour coming there strongly towards the outside with St. Jonathan under pressure, and then Saviour, who isn't done with yet. It's Vaguely Tender and Light Cavalry from Shining Tour. St. Jonathan on the outside. Then comes Saviour. They're coming to the furlong pole. Light Cavalry now takes it up from Vaguely Tender, but putting in a good run between horses is Shining Tour. St. Jonathan coming there, and Saviour putting in a tremendous run now towards the stand side, and it's Light Cavalry in their lead as they race up towards the line, being chased by Saviour. Light Cavalry and Saviour. Light Cavalry's won it from Saviour, second and third St. Jonathan. 4 just in behind them came Shining Tour, and then Johnny O'Day, and behind him Vaguely Tender and Starway and Rontino and Northern King and Super Asset. And so the result of the King Edward VII Stakes is first number 3, Light Cavalry, owned by Mr. Jim Joe, trained by Henry Cecil and ridden by Joe Mercer. Second was number 8, Saviour, owned by Mr. John Morrison, trained by Jeremy Tree and ridden by Lester Piggott. And third was number 7, St. Jonathan, owned by Mr. Richard Swift, trained by Barry Hills and ridden by Steve Cawthon. And fourth was number 9, Shining Tour. So a double for both Joe Mercer and Henry Cecil. A 4th triumph in the King Edward VII Stakes for Joe, who won it in 65 on Convermore, 71 Sea Friend, 75 Sea Anchor. Here's how he won it in 1980 as we review it with Julian Wilson.
Well, the one thing Light Cavalry does is stay, and so the tremendous pace that Pat Eddery set on Vaguely Tender was just what he wanted. At this point, Joe's come to challenge Vaguely Tender. Also, between horses, there was Rontino. Willie Carson didn't have a lot of room to make his challenge there. And on the white cap of Lord Derby, Shining Tour. And Lester Piggott coming from behind, just switching round St. Jonathan there. His man Saviour with quite a bit to do, 2 furlongs out. And he's had to switch round the entire field to make his challenge. At this point, Joe has hit the front on Light Cavalry as Vaguely Tender weakens very quickly. Brian Taylor looked a big threat on Shining Tour at this point on the far side. But look how well Saviour and Lester Piggott have finished. This was a real St. Ledger trial for him. But Joe